Hello and welcome. I'm Atsuma Katauka and you are watching World Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has accused US President Donald Trump of taking an act of war against Russia. After the US cancelled a summit with Putin amid imposed sanctions on two major Russian oil companies, Medvedev, now a deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, has said that Trump had fully embarked on the war path. EU leaders to show strong support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at Brussels summit, discussing use of frozen Russian assets for $163 billion reparation loan to Ukraine. The EU has also planned a new sanctions package against Russia, including a ban on Russian LNG from 2027, while Kyiv seeks autonomy over how the loan funds are spent. Ukraine reports 7 deaths from Russian strikes, including 2 children. Meanwhile, US Vice President Marco Rubio has stated that the US still wants to meet with Russia despite putting these sanctions on Russia. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has arrived in Brussels for the first ever EU-Egypt summit aimed at strengthening political and economic ties under the 2024 Strategic and Comprehensive Partnership. The summit also focused on Egypt's crucial role in maintaining the Gaza ceasefire and leading post-conflict reconstruction efforts. India has restricted online content takedown powers to senior bureaucrats and police officials, following a legal clash with Elon Musk's X over Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 2023 internet policy. The move, coming after X lost a September court challenge, is seen as a relief for the platform. US President Donald Trump has said that he expects to reach a trade deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping during their meeting next week in South Korea. Trump has also planned to discuss China's purchase of Russian oil and possibly restart US soybean exports. He further mentioned that a deal on nuclear arms could be on the table. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hints at opposition to any Turkish security forces being deployed in Gaza during a meeting with UN on the second day of Vance's visit. Israel has also buried more than 50 bodies handed over, while Vance has expressed optimism that the ceasefire will hold, and US Senator Marco Rubio is expected to visit Israel soon. Israeli lawmakers have the advancement of West Bank annexation bills as global pressure mounts for Israel to comply with the ICJ ruling on Palestinian rights. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has urged Israel to abide by the court's decision, while UN rights expert Francesca Albanese has condemned the US-brokered Gaza ceasefire plan as inadequate to stop what she called a genocide. Now we start with the sanctions. The Trump administration has imposed new sanctions on Russia's 2 largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, in an effort to increase pressure on Moscow to end its war with Ukraine. The US Treasury has announced the measures on accusing the Kremlin of refusing to engage in meaningful ceasefire talks. China has swiftly criticized the move, saying that the sanctions have no basis in international law. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun has told reporters that dialogue and negotiations are the only feasible ways to resolve the Ukraine crisis, rather than coercion and pressure. He has further stated that China consistently opposes unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law. Let's listen in.
中方一贯反对没有国际法依据、未经联合国安理会授权的单边制裁。
In Europe, however, the response was more supportive. European People's Party President Van der has welcomed the sanction, calling them good news. Let's listen in.
We have good news from America. Donald Trump is activating sanctions against Russia. So also Donald Trump understood that a peaceful cooperation with this aggressive Putin is not possible. And I also have to clarify that all populists all over Europe who are asking us to do more diplomatic efforts to achieve peace are obviously not right, because Putin has no interest to create peace. There is no Budapest peace summit, but there are now sanctions from Donald Trump against Putin. That's a political reality, and that means we are stronger now as Europeans together with the Americans in defending our European way of life together with the Ukrainians.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also hailed the new US and EU sanctions, describing them as very important steps towards forcing Russia to negotiate. Speaking in Brussels, he urged further international pressure, saying this is a good signal to other countries in the world to join the sanctions. Let's listen in.
This decision of 19th package of sanctions is crucial for us. Thank you so much. And today it goes together with the yesterday decisions of President Trump on energy, also sanctions package. We waited for this. God bless, it will work. And this is very important.
The EU leaders meeting in Brussels has also formally adopted their 19th package of sanctions against Russia, including a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas imports and commitments to meet Ukraine's financial needs through 2027. Now we stay on this topic. Crude prices have surged more than 2% after US President Donald Trump has announced sweeping sanctions on Russia's two largest oil firms in a bid to increase pressure on Moscow over its ongoing war with Ukraine. Both Brent and WTI futures rose more than 3%, extending Wednesday's gains, and touched near two-week highs. Bloomberg has reported that Indian refinery sources expect Russian crude flows to drop sharply following the new U.S. measures, though New Delhi has not officially confirmed any change in policy. The sanctions came alongside fresh punitive steps by the European Union aimed at curbing Russia's energy revenues. Meanwhile, global equity markets have rallied after Beijing has announced plans to hold tariff talks with Washington, easing investor concerns over potential U.S. export restrictions on China. The prospect of renewed dialogue has boosted markets across Asia and Europe, with Hong Kong, Shanghai, Sydney gold has also gained over 1% to around 4,100 per ounce, recovering part of its recent losses. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister, joins us live from Kyiv. Thank you very much, Glenn, for joining us again. Good to see you. Glenn, now looking at this news, Yes, Glenn, looking at this news, will these new U.S. sanctions on Russia's oil companies accelerate Moscow's isolation, or does it risk destabilizing global energy markets? How effective are these?
That is going to be a good question. I mean, most of the sanctions so far have not actually had the damage that people want. And I noticed that it's only sort of on a couple of banks. And what we don't know is whether those sanctions, what sort of sanctions those will be, whether they cut them off completely from transactions in the rest of the world, or whether it's just cutting them off from transactions in USA. But hopefully, when you join the sanctions from the European Union together with the American sanctions, there will be a bit of force behind it this time. But I really still doubt that it's going to have a crippling effect that people would like it to have.
And Glenn, building on that, how might China's opposition to these sanctions, do you think this has any effect on global alignment on the Ukraine conflict?
No, to be honest, I don't think it'll make much change at all. I mean, the big question is whether Trump is actually doing this because of something that Putin is doing or not doing, or whether he feels he has to do it because his his own constituency back in America are actually putting him under pressure to do something. But he always works with the aim of making money. So one has to look at this and ask, why is he doing it? Because it's certainly not because he loves Ukraine all of a sudden.
Right. And also, what do you think about the Brussels summit that's taking place today? And what do you think the coalition of the willing has reached in terms of pressuring Russia further to negotiate for peace and support for Ukraine?
Well, I think we've got to be realistic about this. That whatever we think about it, the fact is that the pressure on Russia is not going to change the overall coalition, that coalition of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and possibly even Cuba joining now. So that nothing is going to change that. And these sanctions will not actually do anything for Ukraine either. So Ukraine is just going to keep fighting unless suddenly Trump turns around and starts giving them better weapons, which still really doesn't seem on the horizon. Then actually things are going to continue pretty much as they were before.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for joining us and sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, we have a breaking news. Russia has condemned European Union plans to discuss the possible direct confiscation of frozen Russian assets, calling the move a theft and violation of the UN Charter. The Russian Foreign Ministry has accused Brussels of displaying a cynical attitude towards international law and mocked the EU's reported proposal to issue zero-coupon bonds backed by seized Russian funds, saying such instruments will one day be exhibited in one of the museums of Russophobia. Now we move on and we stay in the region. Belgium's Prime Minister Bart De Wever has warned he will block the European Union's proposed 140 billion reparation loan for Ukraine unless other member states agree to share financial and legal risks tied to frozen Russian assets. Speaking ahead of an EU leaders summit in Brussels, De Wever has said that Belgium wants full mutualization of risks, financial guarantees from partners, and collective action to harness Russian sovereign funds held across Europe. Belgium holds the largest share of Russia's immobilized central bank assets, which are managed by Brussels-based clearinghouse Euroclear, and it fears the scheme could expose it to major legal liabilities. The loan plan is strongly backed by Germany, France, and Baltic states, and it aims to provide fresh funding for Kyiv as the war drags on. Let's listen into what he has said.
The only ones, Euroclear is the only financial institution that offers the windfall profits to Ukraine. We know that there are vast amounts of Russian money in other countries who have always been silent about this. If we move, we must move all together. That's European solidarity. If these three demands, which are quite reasonable, I think, are met, then we could go forward. If not, I will do everything in my power at the European level, also at the national level, politically and legally, to stop this decision.
Many countries.
Well, I'm looking forward to the discussion on the immobilized assets, not the frozen assets. There's a big difference, the sovereign assets. There's the idea of confiscating them to give them to Ukraine. I'm looking for the legal basis for this decision. This is not a detail. Even during the Second World War, immobilized assets were never touched. So this is a very important step if we would like to take it. If we want to give them to Ukraine, we have to do it all together. If not, Russian retaliation might only hit Belgium. That's not very reasonable. We're a small country and retaliation can be very hard. They might confiscate all kinds of monies of Western banks in Russia, confiscate the European-owned companies in Russia. Look what happened to Google. This could happen to every company of European origin in Russia. So if we want to go forward on this, the risks are high and we have to do it all together.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Gleb Borukhov. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Gleb, for joining us again. Good to see you. Gleb, now looking at EU Leaders Summit and De Wever, what he said about full mutualization of risks, should the EU collectively bear legal and financial liabilities tied to these Russian assets, or should each member state manage its own exposure? What are the risks? Yes.
Good afternoon. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Amazing. So this is a very very debated question because as it was rightly mentioned, the question here is legal. It's not political. It's actually legal details. Legally, there is no basis for confiscating or appropriating the assets. So that's why individual member states are so rightly concerned about possible repercussions from Russia, because we should not forget that Russia, European companies have invested a lot since the beginning of 2000s, and they have big exposure to Russia, both in terms of banks and financial system, but also in terms of real physical equity assets which are physically located there. So as a retaliation, Russia can certainly take drastic measures by confiscating those assets. Russia so far has not been very active in this process, although it has shown some precedent already. So yes, the concern of European countries is quite well-founded in that sense. But that's these concerns only show that there is no unity within the European Union. So European Union is ultimately failing as an institution to represent its own interests. We've seen this many times, and this war is another good example of that. So there is no unified opinion and policy which is supported by all member states. So every member state feels vulnerable, and because they're ultimately not protected by the European Union, because the European Union doesn't have an army, doesn't have its own foreign policy as such. So yeah, basically we just the comments that we've heard so far are just direct results of the failure of the European Union to act as one unified body.
And Gleb, as you rightfully mentioned, that EU's unity and credibility in supporting Ukraine is not crumbling, but there's a lot of cracks. We see even about location of trilateral or bilateral summit being very contentious, and now this too. So how is this stance risking further about EU's unity and credibility in supporting Ukraine? Do you think there is some kind of tiredness in supporting Ukraine?
Sorry, could you repeat this? Is there some kind of what?
Are there?
Yes.
Yes, tiredness.
Could you repeat your last question, please?
Yes. Do you think some countries are tired of supporting or keep on giving funds to Ukraine?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, in fact, I would say probably most countries, except for the fanatics within the European Union, are tired of the situation, because ultimately the conflict is completely artificial. It pursues no real economic or social interests of the European Union. If anything, it actually goes against all of these interests. So the ongoing continuation of the armed conflict is a direct result of political maneuvering and geopolitical policies, which are not backed up by any, economic or social or any other objectives. So that said, it's quite obvious that a lot of countries within the European Union are not aligned with the overall strategy to continue the war and continue the, absolutely useless funding of the Ukraine, of supplying arms to the Ukraine. Yeah, I'm not saying that you shouldn't fund the Ukraine, but I'm saying that supplying arms is a completely wasted business, which puts additional pressures on everyone's budgets. So in that sense, yeah, this is exactly what we've been seeing so far. I mean, we have a coalition, a small coalition within European Union, which are openly opposing the policies. We have a silent number of countries who are just, staying on the sidelines, not willing to take any exposure. But also we have, a number of countries which form the active bloc.
Yes. And
so yeah, basically that said, there is no unity, and this unity will never be achieved under the current structure of the EU, where the EU is actually formed by independent countries.
yes, indeed, there is a fatigue in some countries in Europe towards Ukraine. And lastly, Gleb, what are the potential consequences for long-term consequences if European banks do unfreeze these Russian assets? Don't you think there would be the trust towards these banks would be eroded?
This is one of the key concerns. I think that the bankers and the regulators and people who are professionally and economically involved are having, that these unilateral matters will undermine the trust of other international players, which they deposit into European financial systems. Whether this is really going to be so or not, that's debatable, but for certain, this is not going to do any good to the credibility of the European system and credibility of European institutions. Now, we need to understand that China as a major player is heavily involved with Europe. India is also involved to a certain extent. So whether, a possible unilateral expropriation of Russian assets will send some kind of, alert signals to these other players, this is to be seen. But certainly, I think the world is treating the Western financial system with a big caution right now.
Yes, thank you very much, Gleb Borukov, for joining us as an international affairs expert all the way from Moscow. Thank you. Now we move on to our next news. Moving on to Pakistan, gunmen has ambushed a vehicle in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, killing a pro-government insurgent leader and 5 others. The attackers set the vehicle on fire, burning the bodies beyond recognition. While no group has claimed responsibility, Pakistani officials suggest the Pakistani Taliban may be behind the attack. The leader had reportedly refused to pay extortion demands from the TTP. Violence in the region has escalated since the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan in 2021. Tensions have been between Afghanistan and Pakistan remain high, especially after deadly clashes this month. Now we move on to Myanmar. Hundreds of workers were seen fleeing from KK Park, one of Myanmar's most notorious scam centers. The raid on KK Park was a military operation against the online scam compound that revealed the facility's extensive use of Starlink satellite internet to conduct cybercrime and human trafficking. KK Park Scam Center is located in Miyawadi, a town on the southeastern border with Thailand. The complex was said to be used for online gaming along with human trafficking. Thousands of people, many trafficked from abroad, were trapped in the compound and forced to work under brutal conditions. Local media has reported that in Myanmar's military raid, over 2,000 workers were discovered along with several unregistered buildings. Starlink's vice president has said that the company has cut services to more than 2,500 devices at the center that were being used for connectivity, as in June 2023, Thailand cut off electricity supply, forcing the scam centers to use generators and satellite internet. After the raids, many men were seen swimming across the Moevi River to Thailand, attempting to flee from the country. Now we move on to Dominican Republic. Tropical storm Melissa is threatening the Caribbean and bringing heavy rain to the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Authorities in the Dominican Republic have ordered evacuations in vulnerable areas as the storm approaches. The storm is expected to strengthen into a hurricane by the end. The slow speed of the storm may bring rainfall for several days. The authorities have focused their attention on the Sabaneta Dam, which is currently at 101% of its capacity. According to the Emergency Operations Center, the dam is releasing water downstream, posing a flood risk to nearby communities. 8 provinces and the National District have been placed on red alert by the Emergency Operations Center. Families have been moved to shelters amid precautions and evacuations. Let's listen into what some of the local head of civil defense has said.
En el sector donde está aguas abajo de la presa, donde tenemos un vertedero de agua libre, que no podemos hacer nada con ella, y para evitar cualquier desastre catastrófico durante el pronóstico, decidimos traer.
Now we move on to our next news. Storm Benjamin is wreaking havoc across the United Kingdom, bringing torrential rain, gale force winds, and dangerous coastal conditions. The storm, which is moving from the English Channel to the North Sea, has triggered widespread travel disruptions. Over 200 flights have been delayed and several train services are affected, especially in southern England, East Midlands, Wales, and Yorkshire. The heavy rainfall poses flooding risks, with some areas expecting up to 50 millimeters of rain. Hazardous winds and debris have already impacted roads, with authorities urging caution for motorists. The storm also triggered a warning in the Netherlands, where gusts of up to 120 kilometers per hour are expected later today. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News X World for more news updates from around the world.